Welcome to this programming tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'm going to introduce you into JavaScript, and we're going to look at how we can use JavaScript to create an image on a website. To get started, I've opened up Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create a new HTML file, like we've done in previous lessons. So I'll click on New Text File or New File. I will then select a language. I'll zoom in here for you. In this case, I'll pick HTML. And then to make sure I can run it, I'm going to click File and Save. And I'm going to save it on my desktop as index.html. There we go. Remember, the shortcut to create your skeleton is by putting an exclamation mark and pressing Enter. We can delete all of this because we won't need it. And we can indent this to make it a little bit neater. Now that we've got a HTML file, I'm also going to open it into our web browser. So to do this, I'll find the file, I'll find the location of where I saved it, and then I'm just going to open it up, and in this case I'm going to open it up in Edge. There we go. If I put this to the side of my screen, we can now see the code on one side and the website on the other side. So how are we going to create an image? First, we need to have a tag that allows us to draw on it. This tag in HTML is called the canvas tag. Let's give the canvas tag a name. We'll call it my artboard. And then let's give that tag a width and a height. Let's say the width can be 800, the height can be 500. And let's get rid of this comma that I put. Now we've got a tag over here called canvas, like an artboard canvas, that we can now draw on using math. More specifically, JavaScript programming. Before we do that, however, let's do a bit of styling so that our artboard appears on our website. If I save my document and I refresh my screen, you'll notice nothing appears here. That's because the artboard is automatically white, so we won't be able to see it in this white background. Let's add a style tag to my header, so I can use CSS to make this body look a little bit better. First, let's change the body so that it aligns everything in the center. Let's also change the background color to be a sort of grey. If I save this and I click the refresh button, we've now got a grey background. Let's now edit the artboard by using the hashtag, because we've called it an ID, and write my artboard. Let's give it a bit of a margin at the top so it's not all the way at the very top of the screen. And let's give it a background color of white. Ooh. And there it is. Here's my artboard where everything will be drawn onto. So, how do we start writing JavaScript programming? You can do it as a separate file. There's a multitude of ways you can do it. What we're going to do is, underneath the body, we're going to create two tags called script tags. One open, one close. Now it's important to note that coding reads from top to bottom. If you put the script tags inside the head tag and you try and write to the artboard, the program won't know what the artboard is. So make sure it's underneath the body. It's a safe place to put it. So, how do we start writing to the artboard, or how do we start drawing? Well, first we need to get this element. We need to get this tag to be able to draw on it. If not, the program won't know where to draw things. To do that, we can store it, or we can store the tag inside something called a variable. A variable is a container that can store data. The data stored inside it can be changed whenever you want, and each variable has a unique name that you choose. Variables are incredibly useful. Think of it like a box. You can store anything you want in a box. You can write whatever you want on the box to call that box. For example, if you're moving house, you can call the box hats or shoes, anything you'd like. And you could also use that box for different things. So how do we create a variable in JavaScript? And do remember, like with CSS, where if we write between the style tags, we're writing in CSS. When we write in between the script tags, we are writing in JavaScript. You'll notice if I put a tag here, it's because I got the color, the other tags will break. So let's create a variable. To create a variable in JavaScript, there's two ways to do it. In this case, we're just going to use the var command. So I'll write var, which stands for variable, and then I'll give it a name. We normally want to give our variables appropriate names. In this case, because it's an artboard that I'm calling, let's call this variable artboard. Notice variables do not have spaces between the words. Never put spaces. Now we need to store something in the artboard. The command for storing something, also known as an assignment operator, is an equal sign, because we're going to assign whatever data is over here into my variable or my box. Now we need to somehow get the information or the tag from the website. This website, also known as a document, needs to be referenced. So let's reference the document over here. Then we're going to use a little full stop as a connective for the next part that we want to get. Inside the document, we want to get this element by what it's called, its ID. So let's get the element by its ID. Notice the first letter is small, whilst the rest of them are capitalized. This is called camel case. If we use brackets here, as it says up here, we can enter a string. The piece of text we want, or the string, is the ID, my artboard. And in JavaScript programming, after every line, or most lines, we want to finish with a full stop. Now, full stops are currently used as a connector between these things over here. So we want to use a different symbol. In this case, as with many languages, the full stop is a semicolon. We've now got artboard, which equals the element artboard that is inside my document, which is this over here. Let's now create a variable that stores a 2D version of the artboard. In other words, we want to say that we're going to be drawing in 2D on this canvas. So to do that, let's call a variable an appropriate name. In this case, I'm changing the context of what we're drawing on. So let's call it context, or actually let's call it CTX for short. We don't need to write context every single time, so let's just make it easier for us and just call it CTX. Let's assign something to it, and we're going to assign the artboard, but we want to get the artboard where the context is in 2D. This says that we're going to create 2D elements on our artboard, and CTX is what we're going to use whenever we want to draw onto this artboard. Let's try and draw something onto our scene. So how do we draw things? Really simple. CTX is a command we use, well, it's the variable we created, that represents the 2D version of this canvas. So every time I want to draw something, I'm always going to start a command with CTX. Now for the drawing methods, we need to start by beginning a path, like this. Begin path is a command that basically tells the program, I'm going to start drawing now. For comparison, we also have ctx.closePath when we want to stop drawing a shape. So every time you want to draw a shape or a line, you start with begin path and you finish with close path. Notice that we are always going to be using a dot to reference a drawing command that we want to apply to my context. My context is my artboard, which is in 2D. Now, there's a wide variety of commands that you can use, and you can look at W3 schools to find more commands. But let's draw a scene. We'll start by changing the paint buckets. We want to pick a color. I'm going to draw a very simple sunset. So to change the color of the buckets, we're going to use fill style. Let's make the fill style equal a color. Now we know some colors over here, and we know that we can write stuff like light blue or light coral or light cyan as a color. And we can do that in JavaScript. So let's call this light blue. We'll make this our sky. Look at what I'm doing here as well. You can see that I'm ending every line with a semicolon. Remember, we need to use a semicolon as our full stop. Next, let's look at drawing a rectangle. There's two ways to do this. We can do ctx.rect, which allows us to draw a rectangle, and then we have to color it in later, or we can skip that step and we can combine them by doing fill.rect. Fill.rect will let you draw a rectangle and it will fill it with whatever the current fill style is. This is really important. If our fill style was below this, then the rectangle would not come out light blue. Code reads from top to bottom, so make sure you fill the bucket in first before you paint. So, what kind of rectangle do we want to draw? We're going to use brackets here, and we're going to specify 4 different attributes: the x, the y, the width, and the height. The x and y refer to the coordinates, like a graph, on this tag. In programming, we start 0, 0 in the top left-hand corner. As we go right, the x goes up by 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And when we go down, the y goes up 1, 2, 3, 4. So think of the graph like you would in any other subject, like maths or physics, except in programming, we flip the graph upside down. So let's draw this at 0, 0. We're going to draw it the x and y at the very top corner, and we want to make the width and height to be the exact width and height of this. In this case, 800 by 500. So the width will be 800 and the height will be 500. There we go. Let's see if this has worked. I'll save my program. I'll refresh my screen. And there we go. We've got a light blue rectangle. Let's copy this code, paste it underneath, and now let's do the sun. To do the sun, let's change this color to yellow. And instead of rect, we're going to use a circle. The circle is called arc, and it has a couple of parameters here. In this case, we're going to have 400 by 300 by 150 by 0 by 2 times math.pi. Now this might be very confusing, and I could go through this with you, but let me show you how you can figure this out for yourself. Remember that W3 Schools is our website of choice. It is our dictionary for everything that we need. In W3 Schools, we can go to tutorials over here, and we can search JavaScript to learn JavaScript. We can also search for the canvas. And we can find a lot of different links over here to help us, like the HTML canvas reference. And over here you can find loads of methods that we can use to draw onto our screen. Let's look for arc. Here it is. Now this shows you an example of how to use the arc commands. And if we go down here, we can see what each of the parameters mean. So we've got x, y, the radius of the circle, the starting angle, the end angle over here. We can also have an extra one, which is optional, which allows us to write clockwise or counterclockwise. We don't need that. By writing this command, we'll have a full circle, which we can control the size of with the radius. Now, if I save this, you'll notice nothing appears here. That is because, unlike fill.rect, we've just drawn an arc. We don't have the fill command used here like we do with the rectangle. So underneath the arc, let's do ctx.fill like that with no parameters to fill it in with the color. Let's save this. And now I've got a sun. Lastly, let's do some grass over here so the sun looks like it's coming out of the grass, likely in a sunrise or a sunset. We'll copy the first one over here because we're going to draw another rectangle. We'll put this in green. And let's change the size. The size can stay the same. We might make this a bit smaller. Let's see how this looks. And now what we want to do is we want to move this down so it's about maybe halfway or a bit more down the screen. Let's put it to about 300, the Y, and let's see how far it's moved it down. Perfect. We now have a very simple scene on our hands. Now, it's really important you understand which way we draw things. If I drew the grass behind the sun over here, you'll notice the sun appears in front. The order in which you draw things is incredibly important. And just as a recap, we are using the canvas tag to create our mural to paint on. We've got a variable which allows us to assign data to a variable that we name. The document refers to the actual document we're working on. The dot lets us access loads of commands that apply to the document. In this case, we're getting the elements by its ID. In this case, it's called my artboard, as you see here. The semicolons are like full stops that end a line. CTX is a variable that stores the 2D version of our artboard. Every time we draw, we use CTX, and the dot lets us use drawing commands that we can find on the HTML canvas reference page. We always need to fill in the buckets with a color, and we can use any commands to draw any shapes. And we have to draw each shape by beginning a path and closing a path. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you have found it helpful.